Trial of the Grand Crusader, a 10-man heroic raid that feels like it's a glorified dungeon being done on Classic era by a bunch of hardcore players, a 25-player raid where there's really only one challenging boss that will stop you having your Bis cloak this phase, a dungeon which is meant to have catch-up gear in that's been made pretty much irrelevant now because you can just do any heroic on Heroic++ and slowly get yourself all to R10 hard mode gear. Sprinkle on top of all of this that knowing Blizzard will be in the phase for about 4 months without new content being added, and what do you have? I think you'll find that's called Phase 3. I've done as I promised and I've lived on the PTR since it opened. Shameless plug, but if you're a member of the channel you can see me stream it, so click that join button below and head to the tab where it says live and you can see the past live streams as well. Are you going to have problems with a raid? That's the ultimate question. Assuming there's no changes between now and the second round of testing, which I kind of hope there is because I actually think it needs a health increase more or less across the board. They could probably leave Anabarak and Nubarak. Every time I say the name, somebody in the comments is like, lol, you said it like this, whatever. Anyway, they could potentially just leave that boss as it is, but all of the other bosses, and I mean even he himself also could do with a health increase, quite honestly, because the bosses just melt. But will you have a problem? No, probably not. Positioning on most of these fights is key, and knowing your own responsibilities, which really is the same as any other raid boss you've ever done. In terms of difficulty, hecticness, and time spent in an encounter, I would honestly say Mimiron in Ulduar on hard mode is harder than any of these heroic bosses. So if you can kill Mimiron every week, you should be clearing TOGC. And I truly believe that. We're going to break all the bosses down in just a minute, but I honestly would say Mimiron, Yogg Zero Lights, possibly even Freya is harder than any of these bosses in top 25. Now, I went back to back in a couple of 25 heroics and then a couple of 10 heroics to finish the night off, and 10-man honestly is an absolute joke. I'm not saying 10-man should ever be the most challenging content, but this is really easy. A tribute to Insanity being done every week in 10-man to get an extremely good cloak, a mount, and just tons of loot. Like you can see, when you finish a tribute run, the amount of loot that you actually get thrown at you is quite ridiculous. But this is on a PTR where people are constantly complaining about their UIs and add-ons not working and whatnot, actually on live servers with an actual raid team, because in both of these 10-man heroics, we never had a shaman, we never had healing reduction for the last boss, and just in general, not particularly good comps for actual raid buffs. And everything was still ludicrously easy. Like I compared all the bosses to 25 Mimiron heroic, I would say exactly the same for 10-man. If you're killing any bosses in Ulduar 10 hard mode, like XT even, or Iron Council, if you can do those, you can do this, and you'll have no problems whatsoever. Faction Champs on 10-man is an absolute cakewalk in comparison to 25-man. It just doesn't need the organisation or the setup. You can pretty much just nuke whatever you want and it's a win. All 3 of the Northrend beasts just pretty much fall over, and due to having just fewer people to heal, so there's a lot less panic in the last phase, even a noob on 10-man at the end is extremely comfortable. So like I said, I've spent a decent amount of time in there in the last couple of days. I went in when it opened with alts, socials, a few people from the NA guild I raid with, main healers missing, and quite honestly, the only issue was Anubarak. And the problem wasn't even where they should be, but we'll get into that in a minute. I even thought faction champions would give us more of a headache than they did. We had around 2 wipes on faction champs before switching up the kill order, and actually 23-manned it because 2 people was offline due to login servers not letting them back in. So 23-man in new heroic content on scuffed PTR servers where, because most of us are EU players, our ping's really high. Yeah, you get the picture. Now, if you feel I'm being negative about the content, you're right, but it's hard to be too positive about a filler phase like this. This content will get old really quickly. You can compare my own enjoyment to Phase 3 on the PTR directly to Phase 2. When the Ulduar PTR was up, I literally couldn't sleep because I wanted to be in there every minute of the day, and all of these months later, I'm still full clear in Ulduar 25 on 4 characters a week, and I'm only starting to get tired of a handful of bosses. But you compare that to the Trial of the Crusader, and I'm quite happy to skip the rest of the PTR until the second round and see what the differences are. But with that being said, I'm not going to do that because I've already got raids scheduled, so I'll still be spending a decent amount of time on there, but you get what I mean, the comparison. Ulduar, mega excited for, really enjoyed it even on the PTR. This only being 5 bosses and all of them being, at the moment, a little bit lackluster. Yeah, we'll see how it goes. Now, like I said at the start of the video, for full transparency, transparency, in our scuffed group, we had absolutely no issue with any of the bosses up until the last one. And really, this was just people learning how the actual fight works. When I said we didn't have problems at the place you would expect, we got to the last phase, I think it was 16% or something like that, where we wiped with no healing reduction up on the boss at all and multiple people dead. We spent more time teaching people how to kite a massive spike around the room and into ice than pretty much anything else on that boss. But after everyone actually understood how that works, we was consistently getting to the last phase, and then it was just the healers getting used to not spam healing everyone, because the more you heal, the more the boss heals. Even though it seems like this whole phase just revolves around healers, what really helps here is the more DPS you've got, the better it is. The quicker you can just burn through this phase, the easier it all becomes. So having a stacked group of main DPS in here would have made all the difference. So breaking down the bosses super fast. Northrend Beasts. The first guy, absolutely no threat whatsoever. You're going to have 2 tanks taking quite considerable amounts of damage. And if you've got 1 to 2 Holy Paladins, the full focus from the Holy Paladins should be on the tanks. The tanks will swap at 3 stacks, which is a bleed debuff. Random people will get these snowballs on their head. You just move into melee, everyone focuses them down, and you don't stand in fire. That is literally it. The bleed debuff can be cleared with Hand of Protection, so when a tank finishes tanking, they can just get Hand of Protection to clear it, and you're going into the next phase with the worms with no debuff. We clear it twice. When the second tank has finished tanking, he bubbles off his stacks, and then when the main tank that started tanks for the second time, which will be the last time before we actually push into the next phase, he gets a Hand of Protection as well. The worms are pretty simple as well, but can cause problems because this is all about positioning more than anything else. Spreading 10 yards apart, making sure all your melee are not stacked on one side so they're not all having to run across the room to clear their debuff, and the tanks being aware if they need to come together at any point. But there's 2 debuffs. There's a fire debuff and then there's a poison like toxin. The fire debuff clears the toxin and it switches between the tank getting the toxin and the raid getting the toxin. Honestly, that's it. And then Ice Howl, which again, ridiculously easy. You just tank him against the wall so the melee can get their back to the wall so they don't get knocked back every, feels like 5 seconds, but it's probably more like 20. And when he jumps into the middle, pop a D-sack because it does a massive amount of damage to the entire raid. And then he'll pick a random person and charge at them. If anyone gets hit, they should be kicked from your guild. Joke. They should. Lord Jaraxxus is quite literally free loot. Have your raids spread out, nuke the boss. When a portal spawns, nuke the portal, kill the ad. When a volcano spawns, nuke the volcano, nuke the ads. There's Incinerate Flesh that goes out on random people, which is a healing absorption debuff. You just need to heal it so it don't blow your raid up. Honestly, that's about it. Faction Champs is all just about control and using your toolkit. The amount of times I shouted out to people to use their toolkit, and by this I mean everything. If you've got Scare Beast, Scare the Hunter's Pet. If you've got turn evil on the Fell Hunter. Use your stuns on cooldown. If you're Blood Elf, make sure you use your racial. Don't be scared to equip a PvP trinket to break out of a stun or a fear or whatever. You know, whatever's going to be most beneficial to you. It really is just survive. We tried it a couple of ways, focusing the rogue first and then the warrior, then the hunter. We was pretty consistently just dispatching of the rogue first until we looked and saw how much healing the resto shaman was doing. We switched it up and killed the resto shaman first and then the rogue and a couple of DPS, and it fell over fairly easy. As I say, there was only 23 of us who actually done it. Twins, again, is fairly comfortable. You're all just going to stack on one side and have a few soakers running around soaking the opposite colour to what you're all stacked with. The biggest issue here for us, and the biggest issue which it will be probably for you as well, is people understanding what colour they're meant to be at any given time. And this will just come with a matter of pause. It's not something you should get angry about at your raid, because you might get it straight away, but other people might need to think about it a little bit. The bosses have only really got 2 abilities each that you need to worry about. So the light boss will do a raid-wide AoE, which you all need to be attuned to the light essence. The dark one will do a dark AoE, where at that time you'll need to be attuned to the dark essence, and they both cast a heal. You do increased damage. If you're light, you'll do increased damage to dark. If you're dark, you'll do increased damage to light. So whichever one of them is healing, you need to be the opposite colour, nuke them down and interrupt the heal. Now, it's random in which order these come in, but they will all have to come in before they reset. A little bit like the ad packs on Freya, where if you've already had the small exploding ads and you've had the trio, you know that the big tree's coming next. So you can plan to a certain extent. If your whole raid stacks like we did and you start on light and you get the dark one do a heal so you don't need to change, and then you get the light AoE, you now know you can safely change to the dark essence and not have to change again for the rest of the fight. This doesn't apply to the soakers, because the soakers will want to change for the AoE, but they'll always want to be a different colour compared to the rest of the raid so they can soak the opposite orbs. Honestly, a few pulls on this and you will understand what you're doing, but it really does take each individual to understand what's going on, so they switch fast enough to interrupt the heal, they switch fast enough to not die to the AoE, and then there's a touch of light and a touch of dark that goes out as well, where if you've got a touch of dark and you're all stacked as light, they will need to change quickly and just step out and then step back in and switch back and carry on. But it really is a personal responsibility fight to a certain extent. And then finally, the last boss. Really, ad positioning, having a couple of strong tanks on the ads, and being able to maximize the amount of cleave that you can do so you're always ahead of the ads, so the first set of ads die before the second ones come. That's really a non-issue. Having people understand how to kite the spikes in the next phase, and then having a specific order of paladins using Hand of Protection to prolong the amount of time that the spikes chase people is key. Ideally, in a submerged phase, you only want to use 2 ice patches, and you never want to touch the ice patches that you drop down at the start, because these are basically going to be your go-to ice patches of where you're going to tank the boss. Now, we are actually changing our positioning slightly for tonight's raid, which I'll update you on if it works, because I've not actually seen anyone do it like it, but we done it in 10-man last night, and it worked absolutely amazingly. I won't go into that at all, because it might not work, but if it does, I'll update you. And then the last phase is probably more important, just to have assignments. The healers communicating and looking after specific targets who get penetrated cold, and keeping your tanks as high health as possible the whole time, because you want the whole raid low on health, and whilst you don't want to overheal the tanks and keep them on 100% health if it's not completely necessary, it's definitely the safer option. Once you actually just get this phase under control and you start to realise you can rely on Judgment of Light, Improved Leader of the Pack, Healing Stream Totems, and if you're Resto Druid or even Resto Shaman wanted to just downrank their healing spells so they can keep spam healing everyone but for reduced amounts, that's entirely up to you, but all of that comes together to make for a very easy kill. It probably will, again, just take time for everybody in your raid to understand what they're doing, because it honestly takes one person making a mistake to wipe the raid. If during the second phase someone gets the kiting wrong, or a Hand of Protection doesn't go out when it needs to go out, it can get very quickly out of control, because the spikes are moving at such speed that they will just start killing people, and you're going to call a wipe because you haven't got enough DPS to do the last phase. So get everything under control, make sure the healing's controlled, the DPS is high, you're saving bloodlust for the end, and you'll get yourself a kill no problem. The only things I see spoiling an Insanity run is faction champs just getting unlucky, a couple of your healers getting nuked particularly hard quite early on, or the last phase of the last boss. Outside of that, I honestly think you'll comfortably kill all the other bosses in a really timely manner. But that's been my experience on the PTR so far. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, be sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one.